Alright, today is the last video on Chapter 7, which deals with accounts receivable and accounting for bad debts. In the previous video, I mentioned that there's two ways to account for bad debts, the allowance method and the direct write-off method. And in the last video, we discussed the allowance method and how to determine what the allowance should be or what the adjustment to allowance should be. Today, we're going to look at the related journal entries. Alright, so we already discussed aging and receivables, we discussed percent of sales method, and today we're going to look at related journal entries. So the first journal entry you should know is the journal entry to establish or adjust the allowance for doubtful accounts. And it's very simple. You just debit bad debt expense, and you credit the allowance for doubtful accounts. So this would be to increase the allowance. If you wanted to decrease the allowance, it would be the opposite. So this is an important entry to know. So every time we want to adjust or establish the allowance for doubtful accounts, we debit bad debt expense, and we credit the allowance for doubtful accounts. Let's look at an example. So example number one. So this company uses the aging to receivables method, and they determined that the allowance for doubtful accounts should be $10,000. So like we did last time, they scheduled out all the different buckets in accounts receivable, applied the percentages, came up with a number that the allowance should be, and they're saying the allowance should be $10,000. Right now, the general ledger is showing that the allowance has a $9,000 balance. So obviously, we have to increase it $1,000 to be the $10,000, which is what we want. So what's our journal entry going to be? Right there, very easy, right? We're just going to debit bad debt expense. We're going to credit the allowance for $1,000. Right? And that will bring our allowance up to the $10,000 balance which you want it to be. So that's example of using this journal entry when a company uses the aging and receivables way of doing the allowance method. Let's look at another example. In this example, the company is using the percent of sales method, and they determine that 1% of its net sales, or $2,000, is going to be uncollectible, and the general ledger balance is $9,000. Now, what's our journal entry going to be? Well, we know it's always going to be debit bad debt expense, right? And credit the allowance. And so we're going to take 1%. Actually, it tells you. The example gives you the $2,000, right? So that's going to be our number. We're going to adjust the allowance by debit bad debt expense, crediting allowance for $2,000. Note, it was very important, with the percent of sales method, this is irrelevant. We don't care what the general ledger balance is currently with the percent of sales method. We do with the allowance method because we have to adjust it up to the correct balance. With the percent of sales method, all we do is take percent of the sales and get a number and then make this entry. Debit bad debt expense, credit the allowance for whatever the dollar amount of the percent of sales is. So in this case, it's $2,000. All right, so that's the entry to establish or adjust the allowance. The last journal entry I want to mention is the journal entry to write off a customer balance. And this is very easy. You debit the allowance for doubtful accounts and you credit AR for the balance that you're writing off. So for example, we're writing off the Smith Company balance. We debit allowance, we credit AR for whatever the balance is. All right, so under the allowance method, we have two journal entries we need to know. One of them is to establish or adjust the allowance, which is debit bad debt expense, credit the allowance. And the other one is if you need to write off a customer account. In that case, we're going to debit the allowance for doubtful accounts and credit AR. So those are the two journal entries associated with the allowance method. And you see how they may differ based on the percent of sales versus the aging and receivables approach. Thank you.